now I'm going to share with you, we're going to move in to talk a little bit more about Joseph Wolff. And so we're gonna dive into really quick fascinating information that we have or documentation, I guess you could say, that we have acquired at the Center for Adventist Research that we are especially excited about. And so let me share with you about Joseph Wolff. Joseph Wolff in the Archive, as I call it. So let's start a little bit with a little bit of biography. I think most of you probably know something about Joseph Wolff. He was born on November 9, 1795 in Wellersbach, Germany, to David Wolff, who was from the tribe of Levi. So he was a ethnic Jew, and his mother was the daughter of either Isaac Lipkowitz or Isaac Lieb. Sources actually disagree about the name or identity of Sarah's father, but nevertheless, David and Sarah were Wolff's parents. And Wolff will continue to live a good, rich, long life. He marries Lady Georgiana M. Walpole, who was the daughter of Horatio Walpole, the second Earl of Orford. Married her in February 1827. And then she will die, unfortunately, in 1859. And Wolff will marry again. He'll marry Louisa Decima King, who was a daughter of James King, the rector of St. Peter Le Pure in London. And then Wolff himself will die a little early, on May 2, 1862, while he was preparing for another missionary journey. He had one son, Henry Drummond Wolff, who was born in 1830, and Drummond Wolff becomes a distinguished person like his father. He became an English diplomat and served the conservative political party. And then he also was knighted. He was appointed a knight commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George in 1862, and he rises through a couple of more stages of knighthood before his death. Joseph Wolff was born, as I said, an ethnic Jew, and he was raised in this faith, and he will later join a Benedictine monastery. He calls it a convent in Prague, which I thought was kind of fun since I used to live in Prague myself, and Dr. Mascala is with us today. So Joseph Wolff became a Catholic there in Prague, was baptized into the Roman Catholic Church on September 13, 1812. He actually meets Pope Pius VII on several occasions, but it will turn sour quickly, and Wolff will become odious to the Pope and will be banished by direct order of the Pope and be forced to leave Rome. And he will go to England, and he will join the Church of England in 1819, about a year after he met the Pope himself. And so he had a very colorful life. He was highly educated. He was accomplished in 14 different languages and an expert in 6. By his own hand, Wolff says in the late 1830s that he had preached the gospel in Arabic, Persian, Syriac, Chaldean, modern Greek, Latin, German, English, Italian, and Hebrew. That is bewildering to me. He continues on with other things. He studied at numerous seminaries and universities and other schools from boyhood well into until 1821. He ended up spending 2 years at Cambridge from 1819 to 1821. He was ordained as a deacon in the Anglican Church in Newark, New Jersey in 1837, and he was ordained as a priest a short time later in 1838 for the Anglican Church. He received his doctorate of divinity from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and he got his legal degree from the University of Dublin in 1838. And here you see the only known photograph of Joseph Wolff near the end of his life. He was known primarily for his travel. And Wolff, as he says here in one of his published works, he says he traversed the most barbarous countries for 18 years without the protection of any European authority whatsoever, excuse me, and was sold as a slave, thrice condemned to death, attacked with cholera and typhus fever and almost every Asiatic fever in existence, and was bastioned, which means caned in the heels of your feet, and starved. So he suffered quite a bit in his travels around the world. He had several weaknesses in spite of his worldwide travels. He says and admits that he was short-sighted. He was unable to ride a horse or a donkey, and yet you see an image here of a children's book on Wolff where they put him on a horse, even though he couldn't ride. He couldn't swim. He couldn't cook. He couldn't even shave himself. And he also could not sit cross-legged, which was critically important for the cultures that he traversed in, especially in the Middle East. Nevertheless, in spite of these limitations and weaknesses, he went on 5 major missionary journeys in his lifetime and traveled more than most people in his lifetime. His first big journey was from 1827 to 1826. He visits Palestine, Egypt, the Sinaitic Peninsula, Mesopotamia, Persia, the Crimea, Georgia, and the Ottoman Empire. Between 1826 and 1830, Wolff will go to England, Scotland, Ireland, Holland, Germany, the Mediterranean, Malta, the Greek islands, Egypt, Jerusalem, and Cyprus. Then, in 1831 to 34, he'll be in Turkey, Persia, Turkestan, Bukhara, Balkh, Afghanistan, Kashmir, Hindustan, and the Red Sea. In 1835 to 38, he'll be in Gibraltar, Malta, Egypt, Mount Sinai, Jeddah, Massawa, Kamazian, Tiger, Abyssinia, Bombay, St. Helena, the United States, and he'll go to New York City, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and New Jersey. Then he'll take another journey in 1843-45 to Bukhara, where he'd been before, and he's there to investigate the assassination of a couple of leading, I guess, upper-class citizens from England who were killed there. And when he is there, he will become enslaved by the Persian banditti of the Khan of Khorasan, and he'll be there. And while he's enslaved in prison, he will be preaching about the soon return of Christ and against slavery. Of course, he's preaching against his own slavery primarily. He was not an abolitionist outside of that, but nevertheless, when he was enslaved, he realized that there was a big problem with it. And so he was to be sold to the Turkoman chiefs, but was later soon freed and declared a guest of the officials there in Bukhara, and he lived to tell the tale, as we say. Well, Wolff was a major figure in the 19th century. He was a contemporary of William Miller, and he's significant to us as Adventists for many reasons. William Miller is naming Wolff of Asia as one of the so-called watchmen who sounds the midnight cry around the world. And so William Miller knew of Joseph Wolff, and he was excited because Wolff himself, from 1821 or about 1820 forward until 1847, was preaching that Christ was going to come personally in the flesh in 1847. He gives a date, just like Miller, but Miller is giving about 1843, 44. And that's because Miller and Wolff disagreed about what years Christ lived on earth, but their calculations were virtually the same, taken primarily from Daniel 8:14 and based upon the 2300-day prophecy found there. And so as a result, Joseph Wolff has been a major figure in Adventist history, even though he was never a Seventh-day Adventist or technically a Millerite. So Ellen White devotes several pages to Joseph Wolff's story in the Great Controversy, pages 357 to 362. Of course, Froome will really be excited about Wolff, and he writes a lot about Wolff. He gives a 20-page biographical sketch of Wolff in The Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers, Volume 3, and then he mentions Wolff and many other places in the 4-volume series of The Prophetic Faith of Our Fathers. And so he has been a beloved figure for Adventists ever since the 1830s. Now, Joseph Wolff published 5 main works during his lifetime. And you can see them here. And they went through several editions, but here are the main works that he publishes. The first book is Missionary Journal and Memoir, and it's edited by John Bayford. Bayford was one of Wolff's patrons who funds, along with Henry Drummond, Wolff's labors at the very beginning, and then later Wolff will work for the Society Promoting Christianity to the Jews that's there in London. And so that book gets published in 1824, will get republished in 1827. His next book comes out, and this is titled Researches in Missionary Labors. And this is covering his time there on his second journey, as well as his first journey. Then a third book will come out in 1839 called The Journal of the Reverend Joseph Wolff. And this continues his, it adds, I should say, his recent trip to the United States and other missions that he did in the 1830s. And then a final book will be come out in 1845, a narrative of a mission to Bokhara. And this is the one where Wolff is enslaved himself, etc., and will face a lot of oppression from the authorities for a time in Bokhara. A final book comes out before Joseph Wolff's death, but it is not in Joseph Wolff's own hand. It's not by his pen. A 2-volume biography is published in 1860. It will be republished in an abridged form as a single volume in 1861, and that is called Travels and Adventures of the Reverend Joseph Wolff. And this is a biography of Joseph Wolff that is based upon interviews done with Wolff at the end of his life. It is not written in the first person. It does not contain all of the letters and diary or journal accounts as the other 4 volumes do. And so this is what has been primarily available. In addition to that, you have several other key works that have been published after his death. There's a biography of Joseph Wolff that came out in 1863 by Singelman, and it is based upon published sources, the ones that I just shared with you. It's not based upon manuscripts or original research. Then the next book published, the next major work published on Joseph Wolff is a children's story mission book, a mission story book, and that's by Virgil Robinson. Many of you probably know it, The Restless Missionary. The next book will come out a few years later, and then we're in the 1960s now. It took 100 years for another book to be published on Wolff when Virgil Robinson did that. Then Guy Went edited a book called A Mission to Bokhara, and it's an edited and abridged edition of Wolff's narrative of a mission to Bokhara. And Went himself will add a historical introduction to that. Then John Kay will publish a chapter titled That Sublime Vagabond Joseph Wolff in his book on missionaries from the 18th and 19th century. And so you have a short biographical sketch here in the book titled Eccentric Travelers. Then you had a few more publications, another Seventh-day Adventist publication, Yvonne Davies' Trail of Peril, the story of Joseph Wolff. It's another missionary storybook for children. Then you have a biography by Hugh Evan Hopkins that's published or written from from published sources only, no manuscripts. It's called Sublime Vagabond, The Life of Joseph Wolff, Missionary Extraordinary. And that is probably the most complete biography in English of Joseph Wolff that's been written by somebody else. But there again, it is based upon the published sources. It's not a scholarly biography. It's written for a church press as well. And then there's a final missionary storybook that the Adventists have published in the Philippines in 1992, Zdravko Stevanovic and Jill Fernandez. It's titled Bridging East and West, Joseph Wolff's Vision of a Global Advent Mission. Now, why has there not been, if Joseph Wolff was so sensational, such a major figure in his lifetime, connected with all kinds of nobility, marries into noble families, is connected with all kinds of major figures in world history, how is it that we have never seen a scholarly biography of Wolff ever published? Well, here is the answer, I believe. There are not very many of Joseph Wolff's papers out there. The British Library has about 67 letters from Joseph Wolff. That's the largest known collection outside of what we've got. Then the University of Virginia only has about 31 letters. The Bodleian Library, which is a world-class, all of these are world-class libraries. They only have 8 letters of Joseph Wolff. They only add up to about 26 pages. The American Jewish Historical Society has 7, as does the University of Leeds. And then there are several other places that have some. Durham Cathedral has 1 letter. The Ellen G. White estate, through the James R. Nix collection, they have several. I don't know how many. Michael Campbell, who's with us, he's shared with me that he has several in his private collection as well. I don't know how many, but there are some materials there. The National Library of Ireland has 3 letters. The National Library of Scotland has 3 letters. Princeton University has 3, and then University of Manchester, Nottingham, and Vermont, they all have 1 letter each. And so when you add those together, perhaps there are about 150 letters, and we're talking about manuscript letters, handwritten letters, that exist. And so it's hard to write a full biography, a scholarly biography of a leading figure if you don't have much available. Now, I'm sure that there are many other sources on Wolff available in private collections. I happen to know about a couple of these just because of my friendships with these individuals, but I'm sure there are probably many more. Where are they? Who knows? But let me introduce you now to the Joseph Wolff Papers, collection 381, that is now available at the Center for Adventist Research. Here you see me showing these materials to Drs. Luxton and Arthur. They came down for what I consider a historic event, to look over these papers, which is, I think, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of purchase that the Center for Adventist Research made during the summer of 2022. And here we are looking over these materials, and I'm sharing with them a little bit about it. You see me holding one of the items there, which is Joseph Wolff's personal Bible, which I will talk with you about in a moment. So what do we have? What did we obtain? We have the Diary of Emma Vo King, which is Joseph Wolff's second mother-in-law, a manuscript titled 3 Dialogues, written by Robert Walpole of Oriel College, who was an earl. We have a description of the villa of Horace Walpole, which is a published source that is fairly rare, that gives some idea of the estate, of the Walpole estate that Wolff marries into. We have a music score, original music score by Lady Georgiana M. Wolff, with handwritten notes on the front by Joseph Wolff, written in several languages, in fact. We have a couple of images of Henry Drummond Wolff, the son. And then we have also the more valuable items for Wolff himself. We have a pencil sketch of Joseph Wolff plus an engraving of him. We have numerous loose letters by Joseph Wolff, as well as other notes. And we have 2 letter and manuscript books, as well as Joseph Wolff's personal Bible that he acquired in about 1848. If you add up all of the material that the Center for Adventist Research now has on Joseph Wolff, we have about 150 letters. Now, these are handwritten letters. They are both holographs and copies from the originals of Joseph Wolff. Most of them are in the 1830s, as you see. 14 of them are from the 1820s, 113 from the 1830s, 6 from the 1840s, 5 from the 1850s, 1 from the 1860s, and then there are 11 that are undated, most of which are from the 1830s as well. If you add up the number of pages of handwritten materials, we have about 264 pages of correspondence, about 740 pages of manuscripts, which total about 1,000 pages of Joseph Wolff's writings, which is a significant world-class collection of Wolff's materials. Let me show you some of these things. You see here a sketch of Joseph Wolff. The first 2 images on the left and the middle, those are owned by the Center for Adventist Research. The one on the very left is actually pencil. It's a pencil sketch in what I believe could be, I do not know, but what I believe could be the original that was then later made into a woodcut engraving, as you see in the middle, and as you see published in John Kay's book, Eccentric Travelers. And so that image is strikingly similar. And so I don't know, I'm not an expert in figuring out how you could determine if this is in fact the original pencil sketch. Obviously, you see the signature is different. So whenever they published the pencil sketch as a woodcut engraving, they didn't like the signature that Wolff gave on the pencil sketch that we had. Maybe they thought that his Wolff, in particular, the name Wolff, was a little bit off there. And so they adjusted that, or they had him write it again, or they got another signature from him. And so you see it a little bit more clear on the one that was published. But nevertheless, the image itself is basically identical. I mean, you can even look at the hair and how the hair is drawn and parted and everything like that. The sideburns, even the sort of lines there to show part of where his coat would be. It seems to be that we have possibly the original pencil sketch that became, or that was later engraved. Now, who did the copying? Most of the materials that we have are copies. They are not holographs, but they are copies from original manuscripts by Joseph Wolff. And the copyist was undoubtedly Louisa Decima King. Here you can see here a copy of Emma Vaux King, that's Louisa Decima King's mother. You can see that she recopied her mother's diary that we have, that goes from 1800 to 1852. And then here is the first page of one of the manuscript books of Joseph Wolff, where she's recopying the autobiography of Joseph Wolff. And so when you compare the handwriting, it's evidently done by the same person, most likely Louisa Decima King, because she had the interest of copying her mother's diary. But then also the provenance is a big clue, because we purchased the bulk of these materials from the surviving descendants of Joseph Wolff. They had been sold at public auction in about 2020 or 2021, and then they were purchased by a rare book dealer, and that rare book dealer sold them to the Center for Adventist Research during the summer of 2022. And so for those reasons, the provenance and the style of writing and other kinds of connections, we are fairly certain that his second wife did this copying. We know that she used the original manuscripts of Joseph Wolff because she says so. You see annotations and notes and references to those sources, some of which have survived, some of which we have, others which apparently are either lost or maybe they are still in the possession of Wolff's descendants. It is unknown. This is what Wolff's penmanship looks like. You can see. You see a couple of shots from one of the manuscript books, and Wolff received this book himself, and he wrote a lot in this book himself, and then his wife, second wife, will copy more of his manuscripts into this volume, as well as another one. Her writing, fortunately, is a lot easier to read than his own. But in any case, we have some of Wolff's writing in a variety of languages. We have Wolff mostly in English. Most of what we have in Wolff's own hand is in English. We have some in Arabic, and we have some in Latin. And those are the only three languages of which I know. These are the three most valuable items in the Joseph Wolff papers. We have book 1 and book 2, which are letter and manuscript volumes, and Joseph Wolff's personal Bible, which I will share with you more about each of these as we move forward. Book 1 contains 344 pages, and it's divided into 3 sections. The first section is written by Joseph Wolff himself, and it's a collection of Wolff's own poems and verses. Another section has more of Wolff's poems and verses in his own hand, as well as some letters and journal entries from the 1820s. And then the final section, which is 253 pages in length, is Wolff's unfinished and unpublished autobiography. And this is an amazing account. The autobiography itself is it's really split apart into 5 major sections. The first is the autobiography of Wolff from his birth to mid-1828, and this contains the only known written source that gives Joseph Wolff's first birthday. The only other source of which I know that gives Wolff's first full birthday is his tombstone. But all of his published works, you look at all of the encyclopedia entries that I have been able to find, you look at Wikipedia, for example, and they only list the year of Wolff's birth, 1795, because that's all that was given in the published works. But this autobiography gives his actual birthday, November 9, and his birth year was 1795. Then the second section of the autobiography is Wolff's journal from June 19, 1831 to September 5 of that year. Then you have correspondence copied into there from the years 1831 and 32. And then you have more of Wolff's journal from February 1833 to March 1834. And the last 3 pages contain copies of extraneous notes or anecdotes and a copy of an article from the Jewish Expositor, which was previously published. The significance of this volume alone is that it provides unknown and rich detail that has never been made available or known to anyone before outside of the family. It is phenomenal. And I wish I could share many of these things with you, but I want to give you a couple of points of comparison. This right here is a published account, and I want to compare the published version of with what you see in the handwritten manuscript autobiography. This right here is from page 4 of the Missionary Journal and Memoir from 1827. And Joseph Wolff wrote this. He says, "When I was 10 years old, my father went to another town. And when I was 11, he sent me to a different place in Germany, under the direction of a rich Jewish lady whose intention was to take care that I should be instructed in the Latin language and the knowledge of the Talmud, in order that I might one day become a rabbi and a physician to the Jews. I found in the house of that lady several Jews who were deists, like the old Sadducees, who began to communicate their sentiments that we are not obliged to observe the law of Moses, that all men, as well as Jews as Christians, have the same moral principles, and that Moses was a great man, but a great impostor. I did not agree with them, especially with regard to the character of Moses, but I began to disregard the ceremonies of the Jews and to have doubts about the necessity of a revelation. My brother, who studied with me, had not any inclination to apply himself to the sciences, and therefore he hindered me every day when I would study, and it was impossible to make progress. I became for that reason so ill from sorrow that I was obliged to return to my father's house, and not having any very good religious principles, my moral character began to fall." Now you see, that's it. That's the published account. It's very indescript in a lot of ways. You don't see any names of people, you don't see any places given, and you don't see a lot of rich detail. But here is the version that we have in manuscript form, and it's quite a bit longer. And Joseph Wolff wrote this himself, and he says, "However, after having studied a few months at Göppingen, my father sent me and my younger brother to the gymnasium at Stuttgart, the capital of Württemberg." So we know where, right? "A rich Jewish lived there, who had an immense house and mercantile established at Stuttgart and also at Heckingen. This was Madame Kaula. Her brother Jacob Kaula and her son Wolf Kaula were counselors to the Emperor of Austria. Indeed, the family of Kaula were the Rothschilds of Württemberg. Their piety, benevolence, and amiable dispositions were known and celebrated among the Jews as well as among the Christians in Germany. Wolf Kaula had, when a young man, determined to become a Christian, but was persuaded to give up this resolution when his aged mother went to the palace of the Duke of Heckingen, where he had taken shelter, and there she fell upon her knees before him, and said, 'Son, my dear son, wilt thou forsake thy mother?' He could not resist this appeal, and he remained a Jew. Besides the family of Kaula, other Jewish families resided in Stuttgart, among them Jacob Ottenheimer, who, though blind, was immensely rich and benevolent, and Moses Benedict, the father of the celebrated pianist of that name. All of these families took a lively interest in me and my brother, and defrayed the expenses of our education out of goodwill to my father. There is perhaps no people more ready to assist young men desirous of devoting themselves to service than the Jews. This is especially characteristic of the Jews of Stuttgart, Munich, Frankfurt on the Main, Berlin, Magdeburg, Prague, and Vienna. But I found in the houses of those families before mentioned several Jews who were deists, who cared no more for Moses than for Jesus, and laughed at the miracles recorded in the Pentateuch. With such examples before me, doubts and divine revelation were insinuated into my mind. My brother had but little mind to study, and even prevented me from doing so. I became ill from sorrow and returned to my father's house, rather wild and inconsiderate in my manners, unsettled." Now notice the rich difference between these accounts. In the manuscript version that we now have, you see the places and people are named, which gives you some major insights about the life and world of Joseph Wolff as a boy. You have new information that was not included in the published accounts. We learned of how the Jewish community, for example, supports Wolff during the early years of his education. That was not mentioned at all in the published account, but you get a glimpse now in the manuscript form. And then in addition to this, you see colorful expressions. In the publication, it just says that Wolff's moral character began to fall. But in the unpublished account, Wolff mentions that he had become rather wild and inconsiderate in his manners. And so you see a lot of richness that this volume alone is adding to the knowledge that we now have and can obtain of the life of Joseph Wolff. It is impossible to underestimate the value of these contents. And that's just one manuscript book. And there are many more examples throughout that I wish I could share. It's a phenomenal read. The second manuscript book is 237 pages, and it is primarily a book of correspondence. This volume covers the years of 1833 to 1839, so it picks up where book one left off. It continues on, and you can see here, even though it's mainly about, this volume is mainly about the Wolff's journey to the United States, but what's happening is that his wife, apparently, second wife, Louisa Decimal King, is, it seems, trying to publish another biography of Joseph Wolff that's largely an autobiographical account. So she's collecting Wolff's writings together, putting them in these manuscript books, presumably towards publishing them one day, but this never happened. So there are numerous journal entries of Joseph Wolff from his diary. It starts with the February 12 and 13 entries in 1835. Then you also have some April entries from that year, then October to November 1836, and another entry from April 1837 that goes to January 1838. And we know where she's copying these from. So for example, the journal entries from October of 1836 to November 1836, those were taken from Joseph Wolff's diary that was in loose leaf page form. It was not in any kind of a bound volume. It was just loose pages apparently together. And she copies it from those pages. Where are they today? We have no idea. Now, the diary entries from April 1837 to January 1838, those were made from a diary book that Joseph Wolff carried with him. Where is that diary today? We don't know where the original is at. But nevertheless, this is the only known account of those particular items. And as with book one, this book is immensely valuable in the content that it shares, which is nowhere else. And so to give you an example of that, this volume, as I said, is primarily focused on Wolff's time in the United States. Well, if you look in the published accounts of that, you have the Journal of the Reverend Joseph Wolff from 1839 that only contains 6 pages of Wolff's time in the United States, and they're derived from 2 letters that were published and written and published after Wolff's time there. The only other source of Wolff's time in the United States is from volume 2 of Travels and Adventures from 1860. And this has only got 8 pages. And it's primarily concerned with Wolff's ordination as a deacon. And so this volume of 237 pages, primarily focused on his time in the United States, is immensely rich and provides much detail that we don't have in any other form, even in summary form. And so some of these things are known. We did know, for example, that Wolff met the president. And so I want to share with you a little bit about this. This is from the published account. So from page 45 of the 1839 volume of his journal, it says, I arrived at Washington City. This is from the manuscript version. This is not the published account. Sorry. This is from the manuscript from book 2. 8th of December, I arrived at Washington City and was most hospitably received at the house of Richard Coke, Esquire, a distinguished lawyer and well-informed gentleman in this capital. He is the brother-in-law of Bishop McElvain. And then on the 9th December, he adds, the Reverend Mr. Hawley was kind enough to introduce me to His Excellency Martin Van Buren, President of the United States, who received me very cordially and desired me to come every evening to him. That detail, even though it mentions in the published form that he met the president, the fact that Van Buren asks Wolff to come visit him every evening is not stated anywhere else. And then this volume goes on to describe Wolff witnessing a ceremony honoring Native Americans who had fought with the United States Army, and they were being decorated or receiving some sort of medal by the vice president and president, as well as the Secretary of War. And that is described in this volume. And then Wolff goes on in this manuscript to say, on the 16th of December, he preached in the Hall of Congress. We did know that fact. And then he also adds that he was visited by several members of Congress, but we didn't know that information. And then he explained that they explained to him the difficulties of protecting the Indians against the whites when they have intermixed with them. And so he was very interested in Native Americans, primarily because Wolff is trying to find the lost tribes of Israel. Okay, and here is another fact that we did not know except in this form. On December 20, Wolff dined with the President of the United States, Martin Van Buren, and he met their Governor Wolff. And then he preached there in the White House. We did not know that Wolff actually preached in the White House until we had this volume, because it is not available in published sources. So this is some of the rich kinds of material that we have in the collection. The Bible that we have, Joseph Wolff's personal Bible, which if you see in the little screen here, I'm showing you this Bible. It's very thick. This contains about 155 pages, full pages of handwritten notes in Wolff's own hand, and they appear to be sermons or some sort of theological treatise, and they're based upon the various books that they are near. And so the largest amount of writing deals with the book of Luke. Revelation is a close second, as well as Matthew and Genesis. And then you have 9 pages on Psalms, 7 on Daniel, 6 on John, and then 20 other pages that are broken down between Deuteronomy, Hebrews, Hosea, Acts, Ezekiel, Joel, Romans, 1 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, and then a couple of miscellaneous pages at the end in the covers, and then in between the testaments is something in Latin, and I have no clue what it says. Here is some of that for you to see. Here is some comments next to Acts chapter 3. And you can see here it says events to come. And Wolff is very interested and intrigued. And this is written after Christ did not return in 1847 as Wolff thought he would. And he is still expecting, number one, a personal reappearance of Elijah before any second advent of Jesus Christ. And number two, and most important for us, the second personal coming of Jesus Christ. And then the conversion of the Jews after Christ returns and the restitution of the kingdom. Then the fourth event he expected was a sort of the kingdom of the world becoming the kingdom of this Christ. And then he believed that there would be the distribution of rewards and dignities. And then finally, number 6, universal bliss. Here's another entry I thought you would appreciate seeing from his Bible, which he is writing 7 petitions according to the number of days. And you might hope that since Wolff was raised a Jew that he might hang on to the seventh-day Sabbath, but unfortunately he did not. And so for day 1, Sunday, he says it is he writes, "Hallowed be thy name," the day devoted by the heathens to the sun, now devoted to the Son of Righteousness, the risen Savior. Psalm 19. He has made his tabernacle in the sun. That's what he writes about Sunday. Then you go all the way down to the last day, Saturday, and it says Saturday, Sabbath of the Jews, day of rest. Okay, between Saturn, god of time, which extinguishes everything, so that it something I should have written down. Okay, something us that the grave and death of Christ, the entrance into eternal rest, and something about time for eternity. Amen. So in any case, you see that Wolff is recognizing Sunday as being devoted to the Son of Righteousness, although it raises a question in my mind. Does he still consider Saturday, even though it's the Sabbath of the Jews, a day of rest? I don't know. Possibly, possibly not, but nevertheless, he does see Sunday as devoted to the Son of Righteousness. Although notably, he doesn't call it the Sabbath. It's kind of a research question in my mind. Anyhow, there's a lot more that I could share. I want to end with one amazing quote, I think, from the longest manuscript letter that we have. It's not in either the books that I shared with you. It's an individual letter of 23 pages written to an unknown person. Maybe we could figure out how it's written to the Right Honorable Lady from April 5, 1838. And in this letter, he goes into his views on the second coming. He goes into his missiology. He goes into his general theology. He goes into his politics. It's a very rich source, and has devoted a lot to his time in the United States, and explaining what he did there. But this is something he says about the church and about mission, which I think really resonates with us and can resonate with us right now. And he says this: "But shall I tell the most prominent feature of a real living church? I will tell you at once, this is a spirit of mission. As long as the spirit of mission existed in the Armenian church, that church flourished. But now the Church of Armenia is dead, in spite of her ordinances, of which they have an abundance. Their church is now a complete skeleton. And shall I tell you more than this? But my dear madam, we must pray daily to our Lord and Savior in order that zeal for missionary enterprise may be kindled by the fire of the Holy Spirit, inflaming in us a burning love for the gospel and a burning anxiety and compassion for the salvation of souls. For no natural fire, nor enthusiasm, nor an ardent spirit of philanthropy will ever be able to keep up and cherish and nurse a spirit of mission. The life of a missionary is a life of sacred chivalry, always ready to speak comfortably to the daughter of Zion, always ready to give consolation to the orphans and widows, always ready to break asunder the chains of those who are in prison and captivity of the devil. His armor and weapons are the tidings of salvation, the gospel of peace. His unction is the Holy Spirit. His confidence is the captain of the Lord of hosts. But a true missionary does not only preach, but also feeds the bodily poor and defends the oppressed and the oppressed orphans, sorry. And after mentioning this, Wolff says specifically that while he was in Africa, he distributed not only Bibles, but he gave live cows among the starving population. And I now have major questions in my brain. How did Joseph Wolff transport live cattle to Africa or acquire them somewhere to where he could get them to distribute them among people in Abyssinia? I have no idea, but he says he did so. So he's giving people a cow and a Bible. Phenomenal. I find that to be absolutely phenomenal. So anyhow, that is a brief introduction to the Joseph Wolff papers that we now have at the Center for Adventist Research, a collection that is nearly processed, nearly available for research. It is a very rich resource. At present, it is the largest known collection of Wolff's handwritten materials, or handwritten materials copied from his originals. And so it is exciting to have that available and to have it here at Andrews. And we believe that it will draw the attention of scholars from around the world for years to come.